Everyone, and welcome to this week's webinar. This week we're joined by Ted, who's going to be showing us how to manipulate, Todd even, how to manipulate text data in Excel. He's going to be showing us some of the left, right, and search and find functions and how to remove duplicates in Excel. So yeah, I'll pass it over to Todd and we'll get started.
All right, thank you, Sydney. You can hear me okay, right? Can you hear me, Sydney? I just want to make sure. Okay, I'm just going to keep moving. If you guys can hear me, great. If not, I'm sure I'm going to get some sort of message at this point. Let me do something here. All right, so let's get started. So I'm going to present and cover some material today about how to manipulate text data in Excel, and that's actually a little bit of a misrepresentation. We could actually do some of these operations with non-text data. So I'll have a little bit of that mixed in, but for the most part, it's about how do you separate text strings into smaller substrings? How do you combine smaller substrings into larger strings and things like that? So the objectives for today are to first of all we'll cover joining text strings and a couple of different methods on how that's done in Excel. And some of these are really basic, so some of you may have seen these methods, some of you actually may be used to using them. But then we'll also get to how to use text to columns and the cases in which that's a good fit and it's a good practical method for separating larger text strings into substrings into their own column. And then we'll start into an introduction on some built-in functions in Excel that allow you to extract substrings from larger strings of data. And that's where it really gets a little more complex, but a little more fun too, because there's going to be some cases where text to columns just isn't a great fit. And even those where it is, it's still, you can still apply these functions to extract certain pieces of the larger or original text strings, like we'll get into looking at the left, right, and mid functions and how to use those. And then we'll look at building custom formulas to accommodate string data manipulation needs. So if it's a little more complex, look at some examples on how to use built-in functions like the search function that's going to allow you to search for a particular text substring within a greater text string. Like in our cases, we're going to keep it simple and we're going to search for like a space between two substrings so it can tell us that position, and that will allow us to use that in the left, right, and mid functions in the arguments that are required in those. And then we'll also look at the length function. It's the LAN function that will return the total length of a string in a cell in a number of characters. And that's going to be helpful to allow us to build some custom formulas to extract substrings from larger strings. And then we'll also get into introducing you to the built-in functions that allow you to change letter case in Excel. And again, perhaps some of you have seen these. They're pretty basic functions, but we're just going to cover them all, and then we'll cover an interesting little example towards the end where we could combine these functions that change letter case into sort of a special example that's not just your basic changing things to capital or all lowercase or proper case, that kind of thing. So without further ado, let me get out of that PowerPoint and we'll look at our first example. So we're going to look at joining the two basic methods of joining strings of text or strings of data in Excel are using the ampersand symbol to combine text. And then the concatenate formula or function is one of the built-in functions in Excel. And just a side note to this, in the newer version of Excel, Excel 2016, and I believe Excel Online, there are a couple of new concatenate type functions that have been developed as a result of user feedback over the years, and they've shortened concatenate to concat. And then there's also a text join function, which is really cool. It's something I've used quite a bit since I've upgraded to Excel 2016. If you don't have Excel 2016, you won't be able to actually practice or use these in your version of Excel, but I did want to show those because those are the future of the concatenate functions. So let me, all right, so let me move this. I don't know if you guys can see my GoToMeeting little application here, but it's in my way. So forgive me if you just see my cursor moving across the screen for no apparent reason. But so we've got 3 columns of data here, and these are, you know, city, state, and zip code. And here in the United States, we call postal codes zip codes. And so say you've got a data set where you've just got this, it comes like this, and you say, well, I want to organize these into a single column. And you want to, you know, the typical way that you want to list that if you're going to combine them is just to put a comma after the city and before the state, and then just leave a space before the zip code. Well, we can do that. The first method is using the ampersand. Before I do that, let me just show you a quick example of how to do that with literal string data. So if it's a string, it needs to be in double quotes. So I'll start this, and we'll put hello in double quotes, and then we'll put an ampersand, and then we'll put world in double quotes, and then we'll leave it at that. That's a formula. Sorry, guys. So I need to put an equals there. Getting ahead of myself. So you can see what it's done. It's actually joined those 2 words. It did exactly what I asked it to do. So up here in the formula bar, you can see that that and has just combined those 2 text strings. Well, that's not really what I want, right? I want a space between hello and world. So I need to do this. I need to put another text string in there, and that's just going to be a space in between double quotes. But now that I have 2 strings, or 3 strings, I need 2 ampersands. I need an ampersand between the hello and the space, and another ampersand between the space and world. And so when I hit enter, you can see what happens here. We get what we actually intended, and we've got hello world with a space between. So that's just kind of an introduction on how that works. So let's apply that to our example here. And so, you know, if you've got all this data, this can be very useful. So you don't have to just do this, you know, one at a time. We can type equals, and then now I can use my cell references. So I use A2 for the city, obviously, and then I can put an ampersand. I don't have to put quotes around the cell reference. It's just going to assume, based on the value settings in that cell, that it's a text string. So I'll put an ampersand, and now I'll select B2, or actually, let me go back based on what I told you guys. I need a quote with a comma and a space, because I want a comma after the city and before the state. And so I could just put a comma, but I put a comma space to leave a little space between the comma and the state. And now I need to put another ampersand, because I'm going to put my next substring in this string in the formula. So that'll be B2. And now another ampersand, and I want a space between the state and the zip code, or postal code, if you will. And then another ampersand, and now the zip. So I hit enter, and I've got exactly what I intended. So I've now been able to combine these 3 of the data in these 3 columns into a single column in a custom fashion the way I want, because I can place like a comma or any other delimiter that I want within this string, combining them with the cell references that include the string values that I want to place in there as well. So you're able to, with these ampersand, symbols, you're able to combine all that, as long as you're using an equals, because this is a formula. Otherwise, the ampersand would just be the symbol or the text string that it is. And now that you've got that, I mean, you could consider a situation where you had hundreds or thousands of rows of this. You can just fill it down, and it's not going to fill down. You should be able to double click that. Let me try something different. Actually, and another little tip, if you highlight the last cell that you have your formula, and then you highlight the rest of the cells you want to copy down, you should be able to do a Control D, and it'll copy and fill that down for you. So you can see how that's using the cell references. It's a nice little technique to be able to combine text strings and separate columns into a single column however you need. So that's one method. The second method is using the built-in concatenate formula. And it's not a whole lot different. I don't know that there's, in this particular scenario, there's one way that's better than the other. It just depends. I go back and forth depending on the situation. But in this situation, let's go ahead and we'll start typing concatenate. There you can see the concat function that's available. And what this, I'm using Excel 2016. So what this little caution symbol means here for concatenate is this will eventually fade off into the sunset, if you will. It's going to be replaced permanently with concat, but it's still available in 2016 version of Excel. And then I think that's still that's the only thing available in previous versions. So if you're in a version that's before 2016, you're only going to see concatenate. So I'll go ahead and double click that. And then you can see how it's set up here. It's just text 1, comma, text 2. These are your arguments, just the text. So you can just continue to put like cell references, but you don't have to use the ampersand. Now you've had to put in the function itself, but you don't have to use the ampersand. We'll just use commas now. And then I want to put in that comma in my actual text string, and then a space and a double quote, and then another comma. And you can see how it starts to highlight where you're at as far as the number of arguments. So now my third text argument is going to be the state, and then another comma moves me to the fourth text argument, which is going to be my space between the state and the zip code, and that's just a space between double quotes, pretty simple, and then our zip code. And now I can close those parentheses and I'm done. And I hit enter and we get the same result. So you can see here what we've done again with the ampersand, and you can see here what we've done with concatenate. It's pretty similar. You're just using commas here once you type in concatenate and get that going. And then again, we can fill this down and you're good to go. So it's pretty simple. Like I said, it's kind of, to each their own, however you want to do that. There's just two different methods of doing it. And I don't know the history. I can't really speak to this with any authority, but my assumption is that this method of joining text with the ampersand was probably the original way to do it. And then this function, this custom built-in function in Excel came along later, and they never deprecated this method of joining text, so it's still available. So that's my assumption. Like I said, I don't have any authority to make that statement, but I figure that's why there's two different versions of being able to do that. So pretty simple. So I wanted to cover the new functions in Excel 2016, excuse me, and Excel Online for anybody who has a Office 365 subscription. And so just real quick, we just use, we'll just type in CON and we'll double click this. You can see here it's basically the same idea. You just put in the text you want. So let's say we have this table of columns with size, color, and material attributes, but you got some blanks in there, which could be a problem with concatenating and joining text, because you kind of got to sidestep these depending on how you want your outcome to look in your column where you join the text, right? So if I put in this first cell and then hit a comma and then do what we did before with the concatenate, I can do all this. And I forgot to put my spaces. well, I could put spaces. So I'm going to put a delimiter in here. I wasn't thinking about that. So I'll put like a semicolon. We'll do something different. And so that's going to be my delimiter between my first and second column. And then we'll do the same thing after the second column for the third column. And then see what we get here. So this is great. So we've got a delimiter of a semicolon between those two text strings in the B and C column. But you kind of get this awkward nothing at the beginning, but a semicolon. So if I were to fill this down, you can see how things are starting to look a little awkward. This is a little weird. So with concat, that just doesn't really work out great. Well, the text join function is really cool because it has an element in it that allows you to ignore blanks. So let's look at this real quick. So we just go ahead and start typing text, and I'll find text join here. And so you can see the syntax here. So your first argument is your delimiter. So if we want that to be the semicolon, we just put that in double quotes, right? And then we have our comma here. And then you have this argument that asks ignore empty. It's called ignore empty. So it's basically asking you for a true or false value for this argument. It's a Boolean thing. So true would be ignore empty cells. False would be include empty cells, which would be basically the same thing we just did here with concat. So we would get the same results here. But knowing that we have blanks and we just wanted to ignore it because we don't want this big mess of double, semicolons here or a semicolon at the beginning or two at the end because you've got, blank cells, we can put true in here. But another little trick and tip is that we can also put the number 1. So in Boolean terms, a 1 equals true, a 0 equals false. So wherever you see something like this where you're asked to put a true value or a false value, you can substitute a 1 for true and substitute a 0 for false. To me, it's much more efficient, and that's what I do all the time with like my VLOOKUPs and things like that, if you're familiar with that. So now what you can do is start putting your text values. So we'll put A2. We'll just put in our cell references here. And you notice the other key is here, you only have to put the delimiter in once. And this is only really applicable or practical, I should say, for situations like this where you're just going to use the same delimiter between your substrings. So we'll close the parentheses on that one. And you can see the difference in what we get here. So we just get this nice, neat looking, you get 2 text strings delimited with that one semicolon, sorry, instead of this kind of off on its own semicolon at the beginning. And so if we fill that down, you're gonna see how nice and neat that looks depending on the situation. So in this row on 6, where you have 2 blank columns, you just get this 1 value for size. It doesn't have these trailing semicolons. So depending on the situation, this text join can be really nice in the sense that it allows you to ignore blanks or include them depending on what you need. Now, the other cool thing about text join is, I didn't show you in this, but I'm going to show you in this example, is that you don't actually have to place each text, or I should say cell reference for your text or your data individually in their own arguments. You can actually select a range. So let me show you what I mean. So I'll choose my delimiter. This time we'll just go back to comma, or I could do period, I guess, but we'll do comma. And yet I don't have to really ignore empty cells because I know I don't have any. I can put 0 or 1. But in this case, I'm going to select this range. And see what happens here is it joins all of those, and I didn't have to do each individual cell reference on their own. That's another thing that I really love about this function, and I use it a lot actually in some of my work because I have to combine a lot of like product codes and things like that for database queries, and they have to be delimited by a semicolon. And so I can select, I get data where it's in a row. That's the other key to this. Up here in our examples, we've been working across different columns, but you could join data in a single column this way. So it doesn't have to be in a row. You can actually select a range from a column or a row. So this is a really cool, and actually, I mean, it's a simple little function, but it's a really very useful function. And I've gotten to where I use it a ton because it's so simple to use. And again, if you had a column of data that you had some blanks in there, you don't have to consolidate everything to make this work, because you could just ignore blanks. So really cool function there. Sorry if you don't have Excel 2016 or Excel Online yet, you're missing out. But at some point, this is moving forward. This is going to be a built-in function in all newer versions of Excel. So eventually you'll get your chance, I would guess. So anyway, so let's move on to, now that we've talked about joining data from multiple columns or even from multiple rows in a single column, let's talk about separating text. So we'll go the other direction. So one of the easiest methods is to use text to columns. And again, it just depends on your needs. But say you had that same type of set of data like we were using in one of our previous examples, where we joined the city, state, and postal code. Say you had this scenario that was the reverse of that. And so you got your data all combined, but you're like, well, I need to separate them out into their own columns. We can use text to columns. And so the first step is, in this situation, we'll want to use the comma as our delimiter, and I'll show you what I mean. So I'll select this column, and we go over here to the data tab. I'm pretty sure it's the data tab, and pretty similar to that all the way back to like Excel 2010. You get to 2007 if you're using that. I'm not positive on that, but just look for text to columns. It's I know in Excel 2016, 2013, it's on the data tab in the data tools group here. And so we'll select text to columns, and that's going to bring up this text to columns wizard. And so the first window or first dialog on this wizard is going to ask you some questions. Is it delimited or fixed width? It's delimited. So what we want to do, the first thing we want to do is we want to separate the city from the rest of the text. So we're going to have to select a delimiter. And so it gives you this little preview. Nothing going on yet. We've just selected the file type that best describes our data. And so when we click next, we go to step 2 of 3. We can, at this point, we can select our delimiter. And so here's our data preview. Nothing's happened yet because it's got tab pre-selected. So we'll unselect that. And since we want to we want to separate the portion of the text separated by a comma, we just select that. It's already available here. Now we can select a custom delimiter too, and we'll get to that in a minute. I've got an example for that as well. But you can see in your data preview here that we've now separated city from state and zip. And so we'll click next, and we'll just keep it in general format, and then we'll just click finish. And so what Excel has done here is now separated based on what we asked it to do in text to columns. And now we've got this extra column here that still has the state and zip, but we have a nice city column here on its own. And one thing we want to do, if you'll notice here, we've got a leading space, because the space after the comma in the original text, it leaves that space ahead of the state, because it separated it right down the spot where the comma was. So what we need to do before we move on, we need to actually use a little function called the trim function. And so over here in the column next to it, what I'll do is I'll type equals, and I'll look up trim tab, and then all you have to do is select the cell reference. And so what it does is it removes that leading space, and so we can fill that down really quick. And so what I'll do is I'll Control C, and then I'll here's another keyboard shortcut for you, Control Alt V, brings up the paste special dialog box. And then I want to paste values. So I'll just type V, because you can see the V is underlined for values. And I'll do that and I'll hit enter. And so now we've got just values, but we've removed that leading space. So just a quick extra tip there, and then I'll remove that column. I don't need that anymore. Actually, I'll leave that column there because I want a space between this and the next example. So now we can take this column and we can perform the same thing. We can do text to columns, and it's delimited just like before, but now our delimiter is going to be the space between state and zip. And don't worry about the header. I totally forgot about that. I should have applied the trim to that. We can fix that, but we'll just keep moving. We'll click next, and no changes there. And now we've got a nice set of columns here where everything's separated out. And I'll just move this manually over just for the sake of time. And we do have a leading space here again, I believe. Could be wrong, but that maybe my lines just aren't there. Oh no, never mind. It's just a line to the right. So anyway, short of the formatting, everything has been separated out into its own column in a couple of steps using text to columns. So pretty straightforward. In this example here, I wanted to show you how you can select a custom delimiter. So say you had a list of email addresses here like this, and that you wanted to separate the ID or the name from the domain part of it. So you just want to separate it where the @ symbol is. Remove the @ symbol and then put the name or ID in its own column and put the domain address in its own column. So pretty easy. We'll just go back to text columns up here and we'll leave it at delimited. We'll go to next, and then we'll unselect these preset delimiters that they make available, and we'll click on other. And now we can type in the @ symbol, and you notice here down in our preview, it's showing us what's happening. So as soon as you select your delimiter, it's giving you a preview of what your data is going to look like, and it looks right, looks like what we're looking for. So we can move on to next and finish, and there you have it. So you have your IDs separated from your domain names by using the @ symbol in the email addresses as your delimiter. So just a real quick different example that shows you how you can actually select a custom delimiter and not be tied down to those preset delimiters that they make available in that text to columns wizard. So let's move on to another example here. So let's see where text to columns gets a little bit messy and isn't quite the best fit. So in this case, let's move on to text to columns. Let's click that, and then we'll do what we've been doing. And in this case, we have a bunch of names. So we just want to use space as our delimiter. We don't need this other anymore, but we'll click space or check space, and you've got our preview here, but you can already start to see some problems here because we've got some data here that has a middle name and some data that has no middle name, or I should say middle name or middle initial. So we've got some issues here. It's not real clean, and you can imagine if you, again, kind of think out to a situation where this is more than 8 rows of data, maybe it's 800 or 8,000. If you did this, it really doesn't solve your problem if you needed all the first names and last names kind of aligned in their own column, because in those cases where you have middle names, you've got everything kind of offset for these people that are these rows that you don't have a middle name. So you've got this Leslie Pritchard. The last name is in the second column, whereas everybody else's last name who has a middle name or middle initial is in the third column. So you move here and you can just see how it's just not real clean. Now, you could manually clean this up, but again, let's think about a situation where you might have thousands of rows of data, and it's just not, it's just not practical. So that kind of leads me, it's a good segue into the pre-built functions in Excel that allow you to extract text or substrings of text. And namely, we're talking about the functions left, right, and mid. So just a real quick demo of that is, first of all, we'll just we'll show you what left does. So if I type a equals and left, you can see our syntax requirements here. So first of all, you need the text that you're going to extract your substring from, and then you have an optional argument for a number of characters, and optional is indicated here by the square brackets. So in the left function, if you didn't select a number of characters, it's going to just extract the leftmost character. But in this case, we'll go ahead and select A2, and we'll say we want to select the first 4. So we put in 4 for a number of characters, and that's going to give us 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, this is another one of those situations like I talked about at the top of the webinar, that some of these methods aren't necessarily limited to just applying them to text data. You can use these on numeric data and things like that in certain cases. So this is one of those. And so you see there pretty obviously how that works. We can do the same thing. So if we wanted to fill this down, the first 4 characters of this would be A, B, C, D. So in this particular case, where we have a first name and a last name, first 4 characters is going to extract that first name for us. So kind of getting to the point where you start to see where this can be applied practically, whereas in the previous situation with text to columns, it was less than practical. So in this case, this isn't going to work for Susan Brighton, right? Because Susan has more than 4 letters in her first name. So we have to know how many letters if we want to extract the name Susan. Knowing that it has 5, we can just change that argument, number of characters, to 5, and we get what we need. And so by the same token, the right function works in much the same fashion. So we'll type that in, and it's text and number of characters. And again, if we omit the number of characters or numchars argument, it will just extract the rightmost character. In this case, let's do this, and we'll select 5 for a number of characters this time. So it gives us the last 5 characters of that original data. And then we fill this down, you're going to see the last 5 characters starting from the right, G, F, E, C, or D, and C. And so in this case, it did what we asked it. So it takes the 5 characters from the right, but we know that Mr. Mark Wright's name actually starts with the W, which is 6 total characters. So if we wanted that, we would have to indicate that by the right number of characters. And then for Susan Brighton, we know Brighton is, what is that, 6, 7, 8 characters. So we'll do right. What did I say, 8 characters? So you can see real quick how the left and the right functions work. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy. And then we also have this mid function, and it gets a little more complicated because you have to you can't rely on it being on one side or the other, so you kind of have to give it a starting point in the middle part of your original string. So if I wanted to separate out these names, I know I have to use the left function for the first name, and I know that John is 4 characters, so I can do that. Same with David. I have to apply that to the number of characters. And I know that that's going to have to be a 5. And then just like we did above here, up here we want to get the last name. So we know Smith is what, 5 characters. And then actually we know Grayson obviously has to be 7 characters because we're missing the G and the R. And I know this is not, this is not the practice. I'm just kind of showing you, kind of giving you a foundation, introduction to the right and left functions. And did I miss something here? I did. So now that you kind of got that, I hope kind of settled in your mind on how that works, let's look at the mid function. So we'll start with the equals, we'll do mid. tab, and now you see the syntax for the mid function. It's similar to left and right. So you have a text argument requirement, and that's pretty simple. So we select our text, our cell reference for our text, just like we did on the left and right. Then you have to have a start number, and that's the number of the character in the original string in which you want to start the extraction from. Well, we know that the first name in this row is John, and it's 4 characters. We also know there's a space between the last character of John and the first letter. The 5th character, then the first character or the start number for our middle name has to be the 6th character. So we'll put a 6 in there. And then again, this is just like with the left and right function. The number of characters for our middle name is 4 for Mark. And so we select that, and then we hit equals, and then we can extract that middle name. So in the case of our next example down on row 9, we'll start mid again, and then select our cell reference. And our start number in this case is going to be 5. Well, we'll say 5 plus 2, because it's going to be 5 plus the space, which is 6, and then the next character in will be the J. And so we'll put 7 for our start number, and number of characters, we just want to extract the middle initial and the period behind the middle initial. So we just need 2 characters, and we'll close that off, and here we get exactly what we were looking for. Now, that's a very manual process of doing that, but I just wanted to show you how the functions themselves work as far as the syntax and what the arguments actually stand for. So in this next example, let's look at a couple of new built-in functions that are very helpful when it comes to starting to build your own custom formulas on when you need to extract substrings. So the first one I want to introduce you to is the LAN function, and that just stands for length. And so we type in equals LAN, gets us to that function. You can see it here, it says it returns the number of characters in a text string. So if we select this cell reference, it's going to tell us the entire or the total number of characters in this text string, the first and last name for Chris Reed, and that includes the space in between. So if you looked at this and by just by eyeballing it, you can see that you've got 5 characters in the first name, then you got 4 characters in the last name, but you also have a space. So this should be 10. So if we hit tab, you can see here we definitely get 10. So that tells us the entire length of the text string in that cell. And so if we fill this down, we get a different length for each cell with one easy little function here. And so this can be extremely useful when you start building your own custom formulas to extract substrings of text. And see how Frank Little, the total number is 12, Leslie Pritchard at 16, and so on. And so we can use this, or we can also use another function called search to help us find the position of certain text characters or what have you within the larger text string. And specifically in this case, what if we wanted to search for the position of the space between the first name and the last name? That can be very helpful. So we'll type search, and then our first argument is find text. So we have 3 arguments here. We have find text within text, which is going to be our cell reference. It's going to be our original text, and then the start num. That's an optional argument. We don't need that in this particular case because we only have 1 space in our original string, and so we want it to start from the very beginning or the far left. So we're going to ignore that argument. So what I need to do is put an put a double quote, space, double quote, because I'm searching for the space within this original text. So I can use that cell reference just like we've been doing, hit enter, and it's going to tell me the position of the space between the first name and the last name, which we've already talked about this. We've already, when we were counting, we know that Chris is 5 characters, and then the space obviously must be the 6th character. So it's highly useful, as we're about to see. I'll just fill that down. And again, the thing about to note here is how you can use this with multiple rows of data, and how that built-in function gives you dynamic results depending on depending on the text that's within that cell reference. And so that's where it's really powerful. So let's try to find the length of our first name. How would we do that? So we can say what we want is the length. What we'll do is drawing a blank here. Sorry guys. Oh, I know what it is. Good night. So I want to take the length. Sorry, I had a blank there for a minute. So I want to take the length of the entire text string here, right? Just like we did, just real quick, we'll just do exactly what we did here. So what I basically want to do is, we know that that's not right. Let me try this real quick. Totally drawing a blank here. It works out, but it doesn't seem right. So basically, if I take the length of my entire text string, and then I subtract the result of the search, which is the position of my first space, plus 1, I'll get the length of my first name. That doesn't. I know there's a better way to explain that to you guys. Let me do this. That's not right. I did that totally wrong. I'm doing that backwards. I apologize. Let me do this one first. Maybe this will make more sense. So if I take this, that gives me, okay. Maybe I should have done this first. So I know the length of my last name has to be the total length of the original string minus the position of the space, because the position of the space is 1 previous to the first, the position of the first character of the last name. So in this case, it's going to be a total length of 10 minus that position, in this case, which is 6, which gives me a result of 4, which we can see just by eyeballing it is the length of the last name. And in this case, we've got 6, little is 6. And the best way to validate this is I can use the write function, and I can take this text or that cell reference, and then I can take the result of this LAN minus the search and combine that, and then fill that down, and it gives me it extracts my last name. For whatever reason, I cannot remember how I did that for the first name, and that's just frustrating me. Let let me toy with it for a second. It'll come to me. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on, I got it. So I want to find the space just like I did up on the top section here, goodness. But I need to add one to it, or I need to, sorry, subtract one from that. Yes, that's it, goodness. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so I had to think about it logically. I wasn't thinking very logically there for a minute. So if I use that search function, that gives me the position of the first space. And in this particular case, I know that position less 1 is actually the position of the last letter in my first name. That gives me the length of the first name. There it is. Sorry, guys. So again, we can use the left function, and I select my cell reference for the text, and then I can use that result to extract my first name. And so the great thing about that is you just need to know a couple of formula or couple of functions, and you can actually extract out the first name and the last name from your original string without knowing what the number of characters in each is. You let the LAN function and the search function do the hard work for you. That was my whole point to this. So sorry about the hiccup there on finding the length of the first name. So I'm moving pretty fast here. I hope you guys are getting this. I believe this is being recorded. So if you have to go back and watch it again, you might have to kind of get this. But anyway, I just wanted to show you this is an alternative to using the text to columns on extracting substrings of data. And you know, remember that with text to columns, it actually takes your original data and just splits it all apart. It doesn't maintain your original column. So you may have a situation where you don't want to, like in this case, I don't want to split this column. I want to leave this name column, but I also want a column of data that's just my last name, or I also want a column that's just my first name. So this is the way you can do that. And by using the search and the length functions, you can find these positions, and then that allows you to find the number of characters that you need to extract from the left or to the right. So that said, I'm not going to go into the technically walking through that, but you can actually use these functions in the case that we were looking at earlier, where we had middle names and middle initials on some rows, and then on some rows we just had a last name. And this is an example here. This is all done with formulas, custom formulas, and you can see this section here, it's all written out. In this section, I've kind of broken it down using the search and some other arithmetic to get me to the position numbers and length of the substrings. So you can see that some of those, some pretty hefty work can go into that. But again, if you've got tons of data, it's worth the front end work to do this. And then this section here, again, I've just used the cell references from these calculations here, but then here's the version that doesn't have everything broken down. It has everything actually within the formula itself. And you can see it's pretty long, but you can see what's going on here, just using the search function, the mid function. If error is simply there. If this all evaluates to an error, I just want to leave a space there and keep it clean. And in some cases it does, where there's no middle name. And that would get pretty deep to explain all that. I just wanted to show you that it is possible to use these functions to build custom formulas that allow you to do some things that might not seem possible at first, and takes the manual part of maybe separating the text out. Even if you use text to columns, which you could do, like we showed here, you could use text to columns, but you've got a problem here. You're going to have some manual work to move these last names over to this third column for these people that don't have a middle name or middle initial in the data. And that's great, but if you can figure out a way to use these built-in functions in Excel to build these bigger customized formulas, this will make your life so much easier. And so all you have to do is take these formulas and copy and paste them down, and you're good to go, considering the situation that, this particular situation here. So yeah, so I just wanted to show you guys that. I know we spent a lot of time on that. That was a little more complicated. So in the last few minutes of the hour here, let's look at changing case in Excel. So there's a few functions, built-in functions, the upper, lower, and proper functions in Excel that allow you to change case in text data. So it's pretty straightforward. So if you had, original text data here that was all lowercase, you can change that by using upper, and it's real simple. Just one argument, just the text. And in our case, it's going to be the cell reference. And we just hit Tab or Enter. And you can see how it immediately just changed everything to all caps. And so, again, if you've got some data, or it might not all be lowercase, it might just be all kinds of uppercase and lowercase. And if you needed to change it all to uppercase, you just use that upper function. Real simple, real straightforward. And the same here with lower. It's just the other end of it. So type lower, tab, and then apply that to that cell reference, and changes everything to all lowercase. Pretty easy, pretty simple. Then there's also the proper case, which is going to change everything change everything to proper case, which would be, which basically capitalizes every word or every substring in the text string. So we'll type proper, and then the text, and then you can see here how it capitalizes just the first letter, and then everything else is lowercase. So pretty nice. And again, this is a pretty straightforward example. If maybe everything was lowercase, like in this case, I can take this. It's still going to change that accordingly. So whether it's no matter what form it's in the first place, it will change it to proper case this way. So that's straightforward, kind of simple. You're like, yeah, whatever. But let's say you had a particular case where you had original data like this, and you wanted to change it to something that looked like this. How are you going to do that? So, well, this is kind of cool, because this is where another place where we can use the left, mid, and right functions with the functions that change case. So we want to change the first substring, the word the, to be proper case. Well, how do we do that? Well, we can use the left function, and we can extract the first three characters from that, can't we? So we can use the upper, and I've just separated this out. We could have done this all in one formula, and I'm about to show you how to do that, but I just kind of want to separate it out to show you how it works step by step. And we can use upper, and I can now apply it to just that part of the original string, and then we get, I'm sorry, I used upper, I meant proper. And so there we go, we got the capitalized T on the word the. And in this case, we want to extract ABC, so we're going to use the mid function. We know that that's going to start with the fifth character, because the word the is 3 characters, and then there's a space, which is the fourth. And then we just want 3 characters for ABC. And then we'll apply the upper function on that substring, and there we have it. And then last but not least, we will take the word company, which we know is going to be, what is that, 7 letters. And then we've got that isolated, and now we can also apply the proper function on that, and then we get what we need. So I could just concatenate these, but let's just see how to do this all together. So I need to apply the proper function on the first 3 letters. and then we're going to concatenate this, right? So I need a space. So what's actually happening here is I'm actually separating all the text in the original data, and then I'm concatenating it all within the same formula. At the same time, I'm imposing the case functions that I want to in order to change the case of the text. So I'm doing kind of like three things at the same time on three separate pieces of the original string. So I need another and, so I'll start the mid function here. I'm sorry, actually I'll start the upper function to make the results of my mid function all caps. And so that's what, 5 and 3. And then another ampersand, because now I've got to reattach it to the rest of the text string that we've separated out. And this is going to be proper again. And that text, and then what is that, 7 characters? I think I missed something here. Totally did. And I think that's going to be right. Yep, so there's your result. You get the ABC company with caps on ABC portion of it, and then proper case for the V and the company. And you can see our eventual formula here. And so again, what this is doing is basically 3 different things in the same formula. You're actually separating all 3 substrings of the text by using the left, mid, and right functions. And then you're imposing the case functions on those as you need them. And you can do that for each of them individually, which worked out really well here. And then you're rejoining them, or you're reconcatenating them in the same formula. So just to kind of give you wrapping up the hour, just kind of give you another example of how you can put all these really cool and really useful built-in functions in Excel and use them all together in custom formulas depending on your needs is really good place to stop here. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Sydney, and I think we're at we're 11:27 my time here in the States. I don't remember what time it is for you guys, but I know we're at the bottom of the hour, so I'll kick it back over to Sydney and hope she's still on. I know she was having some technical difficulties earlier.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just see if we've got any questions that anyone wants to ask. I can't see any. But yeah, we are at the end. So yeah, thank you to everyone for listening. I hope you all learned something, and this session is being recorded, so I'll get to editing that and sending it all out to everyone so you can watch whenever you want. So yeah, I hope that everyone enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.